Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Alex Brennan, and finding Sarah Chen's hiking boot wedged 15 feet up in the fork of an ancient oak tree, with no ladder marks, no climbing gear, and no possible way for it to have gotten there naturally, was when I first understood that everything I thought I knew about reality was laughably, terrifyingly wrong. I'd been a ranger for exactly 4 months and 12 days, fresh out of the academy, still fumbling with radio codes, still double-checking GPS coordinates like a nervous student. The other rangers at Great Smoky Mountains called me rookie, with the kind of patient exhaustion reserved for overeager puppies. I wanted to prove myself so badly it made my chest tight during morning briefings. Sarah Chen had been reported missing 36 hours earlier, 23 years old, graduate student in anthropology from University of Tennessee, last seen heading toward the Appalachian Trail near Cataract Falls. Her parents' voices still echoed in my head from the phone call that morning. Her mother's broken English dissolving into Mandarin sobs. Her father's controlled panic asking the same question over and over. You will find her, yes? You will bring our daughter home? I'd promised them I would. Rookie mistake number 1. The boot was a size 7 Nike Trail Runner, purple and gray with dried mud caked in treads that matched the soil composition from Sector 7 of the grid search. But Sector 7 was 3 miles southeast of this oak tree, and 15 feet up. My radio crackled. Unit 47, this is base. Status report over. I stared up at the boot, my breathing becoming shallow and rapid like I just sprinted uphill. The rational part of my brain, the part trained to think in terms of evidence and logical explanations, scrambled for answers. Maybe she'd thrown it, but the trajectory was impossible. Maybe someone else had placed it there. But who, and why, and how? Unit 47, do you copy? The radio static seemed louder than usual, more aggressive. I keyed the radio, my palms slick with sudden sweat. Base, this is 47. I found evidence at coordinates 35.6307, 83.5547. Request backup for item recovery. Copy that 47. Nature of evidence? The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. How do you explain the impossible? Personal item belonging to the missing person, located in elevated position. A pause. Elevated position? Clarify. 47. I couldn't. Not without sounding like an idiot or worse, like I was losing my mind. Just send backup base, and bring climbing gear. The static that followed felt wrong. Too long, too full of things that might have been whispers if I let myself believe in whispers. While waiting for backup, I circled the tree with the methodical precision they'd drilled into us at the academy. No scuff marks on the bark, no disturbed soil at the base, no footprints except my own. The boot hung there like an accusation, like evidence of laws of physics that didn't apply in this particular corner of the world. That's when I noticed the bones. Not human bones. I knew those from my forensics training. These were different. Arranged in a perfect spiral pattern around the base of the oak, half buried in decades of leaf litter. Bird bones mostly, some small mammals. But the arrangement was too precise, too purposeful to be natural. Each bone had been cleaned to ivory whiteness and positioned with mathematical exactness. My fingers went numb as I crouched to examine them closer. The bone spiral extended outward from the tree in a pattern that hurt to look at directly, not because it was gruesome, but because it suggested geometries that my brain couldn't quite process. The longer I stared, the more the pattern seemed to shift and writhe like it was breathing. I jerked backward, my heart hammering against my ribs in rapid, bird-like beats. My vision narrowed to a tunnel, peripheral awareness disappearing entirely. The forest around me, usually alive with the sounds of wind, insects, distant birds, had gone silent in a way that felt absolute, oppressive, wrong. That's when I heard the first whisper. Not a human whisper, something else entirely. a sound like dried leaves scraping against bone, like wind passing through empty rib cages. The words, if they were words, came from no particular direction and seemed to bypass my ears entirely, resonating directly in the bone cavity of my skull. The collector, remember the old arrangements, I mean the proper order. I scrambled to my feet, knocking over my water bottle, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my radio. Base, this is Unit 47. I need immediate backup at my location. There's something here. Static. Nothing but static that seemed to pulse with a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. I tried my cell phone. No signal. The GPS display flickered and died, then came back showing coordinates that couldn't possibly be correct. Numbers that placed me somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The whispers grew stronger, more insistent, and now I could see something moving between the trees in my peripheral vision. Not walking, flowing, like shadows given substance and malevolent purpose. She came seeking the old knowledge. She found the proper arrangement. Now she serves. Sarah? My voice cracked like a 13-year-old boy's. Sarah Chen? The shadow thing moved closer and I could see it more clearly now. It had once been human, maybe, but that was a long time ago. Centuries, possibly. It wore the remnants of clothing I didn't recognize. Some kind of hide garment decorated with patterns that matched the bone spiral. But it was the eyes that made my rational mind finally, completely shatter. The eyes were holes, not empty sockets, but actual holes that went deeper than a skull should allow, deeper than the laws of anatomy could possibly accommodate. Looking into them was like looking into a well that fell through the center of the earth and out the other side, into a space where different stars burned with different colors and cast shadows that fell upward. The thing that had once been human spoke, and its voice was the sound of every funeral I'd ever attended, every cemetery I'd ever walked through, every nightmare about being buried alive that I'd ever woken from in a cold sweat. The collector has need of new arrangements. Your bones sing a song of fear. Fear makes the strongest foundations. I ran. Rookie mistake number 2 was thinking I could escape something that existed outside the normal rules of reality. I crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at my uniform, my radio bouncing uselessly against my hip. Behind me, I could hear something following. Not footsteps, but a sound like dozens of bone wind chimes clacking together in a hurricane. The GPS on my belt kept flickering between impossible coordinates, showing me running through locations that couldn't exist. The bottom of the ocean, the surface of the moon, the space between atoms. I burst into a clearing I'd never seen before, though I'd memorized every square mile of this sector during training. In the center stood a structure that violated every principle of architecture I understood. It was part cave, part building, part organic growth. Bone supports held up walls of compacted earth and decomposed leaves. Skulls, human and animal, had been embedded in the walls like decorative elements, their empty sockets all facing inward towards something at the center. And there, suspended above what looked like an altar made of femurs and rib cages, hung Sarah Chen. She was alive. That was the worst part. She was alive. But she was wrong. Her arms and legs had been stretched to impossible lengths, like someone had pulled taffy. Her bones had been removed and rearranged outside her skin, creating a lattice framework that held her suspended 3 feet above the altar. She was conscious, her eyes tracking my movement as I stumbled into the clearing. "Alex," she said, and her voice was perfectly normal, conversational, as if we'd met for coffee instead of in this nightmare cathedral of bone and flesh. "You're just in time for the arrangement." "Sarah, Jesus Christ, what did they do to you?" She smiled, and I saw that her teeth had been replaced with small vertebrae. "They didn't do anything to me, Alex. I chose this. Do you know what I was studying? Pre-Columbian death cults. I came here looking for evidence of the bone collector. I found him. We need to get you out of here. I need to call for medical—" "Look around, Alex." Sarah's elongated arm gestured to the walls of the structure. "Really look." I forced myself to examine the skull decorations more closely. Some were definitely animal, bear, deer, smaller mammals I couldn't identify. But others were unmistakably human, and the human skulls weren't old. Some still had traces of soft tissue, hair, modern dental work. "How many people?" I whispered. "Hundreds, over the centuries." "The collector doesn't kill, Alex, he preserves, he arranges, he's creating something beautiful." That's when I saw the thing itself. It emerged from the back of the bone cathedral like a living shadow given weight and purpose. Tall, maybe 8 feet, maybe 12. It was hard to tell because it seemed to exist in more dimensions than my eyes could process. It wore the bones of its victims like jewelry, like armor, like religious vestments. Human femurs formed a crown around its skull. Rib cages had been woven into a cloak that rustled with every movement. Its hands were collections of finger bones from dozens of different people, assembled into tools of surgical precision. But worst of all was its face, or rather, its lack of one. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth expanse of yellowed bone, like a skull that had never had openings for eyes or nose or mouth. Yet somehow, I knew it was looking at me, studying me, evaluating the architectural potential of my skeleton. "Welcome, small guardian of the green places," it said without speaking, its voice materializing directly inside my skull. "You have found your way to the arrangement. Your bones will sing beautifully in the foundation." "I'm a federal ranger," I said, as if that meant anything in this place where physics came to die. "People know where I am. They'll come looking. Many guardians have come before you. Rangers, hunters, soldiers, scientists, all seeking the missing, all finding the arrangement, all contributing to the great work." The collector gestured to the walls around us, and I realized with a horror that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the primordial terror centers of my brain that the skulls weren't randomly placed. They were organized by profession. Here, a cluster of law enforcement badges tucked into eye sockets. There, a section where academic credentials had been carefully preserved and displayed beneath the craniums of their former owners. "The work is ancient, small guardian. Older than your cities. Older than your civilization. Older than your species' first terrified glimpse of death. I am the last of my people, and my people were the first to understand that life is merely the crude arrangement of minerals and carbon that will eventually return to its proper configuration. I simply assist in the transition." "You're insane," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I could feel something terrible happening to my perception of reality. The bone cathedral was beginning to make sense. The patterns, the arrangements, the way each skull and femur and vertebra had been placed with mathematical precision. It was all part of some vast equation I was only beginning to comprehend. Insanity is your species' word for truths too large for your limited consciousness to contain. Observe. The collector raised one of its many-fingered hands, and suddenly I could see the patterns underlying everything. Not just the bone arrangements in this cathedral, but the patterns that connected every living thing in the forest. I could see the flow of nutrients from decomposing bodies into the soil, from soil into trees, from trees into animals, from animals back into bodies. I could see the vast cycle of death and growth and death again, and I could see how the collector's work was part of that cycle, not an interruption of nature, but a refinement of it. For one terrifying moment, it all made perfect sense. That was when I understood that I was looking into the face of cosmic truth, and cosmic truth was utterly indifferent to human existence. We were temporary arrangements of carbon and phosphorus, brief patterns in an endless dance of matter and energy that would continue long after our sun burned out and our galaxy spiraled into the void. The collector wasn't evil in any human sense. It was simply operating according to physical laws that existed on a scale too vast for human morality to comprehend. And that understanding was going to drive me insane. I felt my mind beginning to fracture, reality splitting into fragments that no longer fit together properly. The bone cathedral was simultaneously ancient and immediate, solid and ephemeral, beautiful and horrifying. Sarah's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "Isn't it wonderful, Alex? Isn't it perfect?" But then, through the cosmic vertigo and existential terror, I heard something else. Something small and human and desperately important. My radio, crackling with static, but underneath the static, a voice. Unit 47, this is Chief Ranger Patterson. Alex, if you can hear this, we're tracking your GPS signal. Hold your position. Backup is en route. Chief Patterson. My boss, my mentor, the man who'd given a rookie a chance when other departments had passed me over. The man whose voice had talked me through my first body recovery, my first missing child case, my first encounter with human evil. The voice of normal, human reality. The collector's attention swiveled toward my radio like a predator noticing movement. Interference. The arrangement must not be disturbed. Alex? Sarah called from her suspension above the bone altar. Don't fight it. Just let go. It's so much easier when you let go. But I thought about Chief Patterson driving through the forest right now, probably with half the ranger station behind him. I thought about Sarah Chen's parents waiting by their phone for news that would never come if I gave up. I thought about my wife, Emily, who'd married a man who wanted to protect people, and my 2-year-old daughter, Maya, who still believed her daddy could fix anything. I thought about human love in the face of cosmic indifference, and I chose love. Mistake, the collector said, reading my thoughts as easily as I might read a trail marker. Love is the most temporary arrangement of all. Bone endures, stone endures, the patterns endure. Love is vapor. Maybe, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. But it's my vapor. I pulled out my service weapon, a Glock 22 that suddenly felt inadequate as a soup spoon in the face of this ancient, inhuman intelligence. But I didn't point it at the collector. Instead, I aimed at the bone supports holding up the cathedral's ceiling. You cannot destroy the arrangement. It exists in dimensions your weapons cannot reach. I don't need to destroy it, I said. I just need to mess it up enough for backup to find us. I fired 6 rounds into the support structure. The human femurs splintered like dry wood, and the carefully arranged skulls tumbled from their positions. The mathematical precision of the bone patterns dissolved into chaos. The collector's roar shook the forest around us, a sound like every cemetery in the world screaming at once. The bone cathedral began to collapse, but as it fell, I saw something that gave me hope. It was becoming visible. Whatever dimensional properties had hidden it from normal perception were failing along with the structural integrity. Sarah's elongated form crashed to the ground as the bone lattice supporting her disintegrated. She was hurt, badly, but she was human-shaped again. The collector's influence was weakening. You have disrupted centuries of work, the entity raged. The patterns must be maintained. The arrangement must be completed. Then you'll have to start over, I said, grabbing Sarah under the arms and dragging her toward what I hoped was an exit. Without us. The collector moved to block our path, but as it did, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Helicopter rotors. Search and rescue, coming in fast and low over the trees. Through the gaps in the collapsing bone cathedral, I could see floodlights sweeping the forest canopy. This is not possible, the collector said, and for the first time its mental voice carried something that might have been confusion. The arrangement should hide this place from their perception. Maybe your patterns aren't as perfect as you thought, I said, though I was bluffing. I had no idea why the rescue team could suddenly see us. But then I looked down at Sarah, and I understood. She was clutching something in her hand. A small carved pendant, maybe bone, maybe wood, inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. As I watched, the pendant crumbled to dust between her fingers. Protection charm, she whispered through lips that were barely human-shaped again. Made it from samples. Before I understood what I was really dealing with. The helicopter was directly overhead now, its downdraft scattering the bone arrangements further. Through the rotor noise, I could hear Chief Patterson's voice on a bullhorn. This is the National Park Service. Anyone in the area, identify yourselves. The collector looked up at the aircraft, and I saw something in its non-face that might have been surprise, fear. After centuries of operating in isolation, it was facing something it hadn't planned for. Human technology guided by human love and human stubbornness. "This is not the arrangement," it said, almost to itself. This was not foreseen. I hauled Sarah to her feet, both of us stumbling as the bone cathedral collapsed around us. "That's the thing about humans," I said. "We're really, really good at messing up other people's plans." We burst out of the collapsing structure into normal forest, trees that looked like trees, ground that felt solid, air that didn't whisper with the voices of the dead. Behind us, the collector's roars faded into something that might have been wind through branches, or might have been the sound of cosmic forces retreating to lick their wounds. The rescue helicopter landed in a clearing 50 yards away. Chief Patterson was first out, followed by a full medical team. As they ran toward us, I turned back to look at the spot where the bone cathedral had been. Nothing, just normal forest floor, covered with the kind of random animal bones you'd expect to find in any woodland. No patterns, no arrangements, no evidence that anything supernatural had ever existed there. Except for one thing. Sarah's hiking boot still hung in the fork of the ancient oak tree, 15 feet up, with no explanation for how it had gotten there. I never filed a complete report about what happened that day. How could I? Who would believe that cosmic forces older than human civilization were operating in our national forest? That death itself had taken physical form and been collecting human bones for centuries. Instead, I wrote about a complicated rescue involving unstable terrain and a disoriented victim. I recommended counseling for Sarah, who spent 3 months in a psychiatric facility before returning to her studies, with a new focus on contemporary folklore rather than ancient death cults. The collector never bothered us again. Maybe we'd disrupted its work badly enough to force it to find a new location. Maybe the advent of GPS tracking and satellite surveillance made its old methods too risky. Or maybe it simply decided that modern humans were too chaotic, too unpredictable, too connected to the outside world to be worth the effort. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the forest, I can feel something vast and patient watching from the spaces between the trees. Something that remembers when the continent was young and humans were just another kind of animal to be hunted and arranged. Something that understands patterns I can't even perceive, and that views my entire species as a temporary inconvenience in plans that span geological ages. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear the sound of bone wind chimes clacking together somewhere in the distance, playing a song that predates music itself. My name is Alex Brennan, and I've been a ranger for 3 years now. Not a rookie anymore. I've handled missing persons cases, wildlife incidents, search and rescue operations. I've saved lives and comforted families and upheld the law in some of the most remote places in America. But I've never forgotten that there are things in this world, older and larger and more terrible than human understanding, things that view our greatest achievements as the brief scratchings of insects, our deepest loves as chemical reactions that will fade with the heat death of the universe. And the only thing, standing between those cosmic forces and the people I'm sworn to protect is the stubborn, irrational, absolutely human insistence that love matters anyway. That temporary doesn't mean meaningless. That even if we're just patterns of carbon and water arranged by chance in an indifferent cosmos, those patterns have chosen to care about each other. It's not much of a defense against entities that have been shaping reality since before our planet existed. But sometimes, in the right circumstances, with enough luck and determination and pure human cussedness, it's enough. Sometimes, it's enough to mess up their arrangements completely. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Alex Brennan's situation? Comment below. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Sarah Chen. I read every single one. My name is Connor Hayes, and I've been a forest ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 12 years. In all that time, I've heard every ghost story, every urban legend, every piece of backwoods folklore these mountains have to offer, and I've never believed a single goddamn word of it. Until October 23rd, 2018, the night Ethan Davis disappeared while hunting for the woman in white. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. from Ethan's girlfriend, Sarah Chen. Her voice cracked through my Motorola APX radio like breaking glass. "My boyfriend hasn't come back. He went to Cherokee Orchard Road 3 hours ago with his camera equipment. He was looking for that ghost story, the woman in white." I should have rolled my eyes. Should have muttered something about amateur paranormal investigators and their YouTube channels. Instead, my throat constricted like someone had wrapped wire around my windpipe. Because I knew Cherokee Orchard Road, I knew the stories, and I knew that 3 people had gone missing on that stretch of crumbling asphalt in the past 18 months. "Ma'am, what's your boyfriend's full name and physical description?" I asked, grabbing my tactical flashlight and field notebook. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, and I blamed it on the October cold seeping through the ranger station windows. "Ethan Davis. He's 24, about 5'10", brown hair, wearing a gray North Face jacket and jeans. He drives a blue Honda Civic, license plate TN4F7G829. Sarah's voice dissolved into sobbing. "He said he was going to prove the woman in white was real. He had all this research about Maria Santos." My pen stopped moving. Maria Santos. I'd heard that name whispered around campfires, seen it scrawled in graffiti on abandoned buildings. According to local legend, Maria was a young mother who died in a car accident on Cherokee Orchard Road in 1987. Her 3-year-old daughter Emma was thrown from the vehicle and died 3 days later in the hospital. The story went that Maria's spirit, dressed in the white gown she wore to her daughter's funeral, wandered the road looking for Emma, and anyone who saw her would die within 48 hours. Bullshit. Complete bullshit. "I'm heading out to look for him now," I told Sarah. "Stay by your phone." I grabbed my full SAR pack from the equipment room: rope, first aid kit, emergency food, water purification tablets, GPS unit, extra batteries, the works. As I loaded everything into my Ford F-150, my hands moved with practiced efficiency, but my mind kept circling back to those 3 missing persons cases. Jennifer Walsh, 19, photography student, disappeared March 15th while taking night photos of atmospheric conditions. David Kim, 32, true crime podcaster, last seen June 8th interviewing locals about unexplained phenomena. Michelle Torres, 28, graduate student researching Southern Gothic folklore. Vanished August 22nd, all on Cherokee Orchard Road, all at night, all looking for the woman in white. The drive to Cherokee Orchard took 23 minutes through winding mountain roads. My headlights cut through fog that seemed to thicken with every mile, rolling off the peaks like something alive. The radio crackled with static, and twice I thought I heard whispers underneath the white noise. I found Ethan's Honda Civic at 12:31 a.m., parked at the old Elkmont entrance where the paved road gives way to gravel. The car was unlocked, keys still in the ignition, engine cold. His camera bag sat in the passenger seat, expensive Canon equipment scattered across the leather like he'd been digging through it in a hurry. "Ethan," I called, my voice swallowed by the fog. "Ethan Davis, park ranger." Nothing. Just the sound of wind through bare branches and my own breathing getting faster and shallower. I pulled on my tactical gloves and started examining the scene with my LED flashlight. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of where Ethan had gone. His footprints led from the car toward the old road clear in the muddy ground, but after about 50 yards they just stopped. Not like he turned around or stepped onto rocks. They stopped, like he'd been lifted into the air. My pulse hammered against my collar as I followed the trail to its abrupt end. I knelt down, studying the last clear boot print in the mud. Size 10. Timberland, consistent with the others. But around that final print, the ground was disturbed in a perfect circle like something had pressed down from above. "What the hell?" I muttered, playing my flashlight beam in wider circles. The fog seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision, and twice I spun around thinking I'd seen movement. That's when I found the camera. Ethan's backup camera, a smaller digital model, lay in the underbrush 30 feet from his last footprint. The LCD screen was cracked, but the power light still blinked red. My fingers felt numb and clumsy as I turned it on and scrolled through the last photos. The first few shots were standard paranormal investigator fare. blurry trees, fog formations, light anomalies that were probably just lens flares. But the timestamp showed he'd been taking pictures right up until 11:44 p.m., just 3 minutes before Sarah called it in. The last photo made my stomach lurch like I'd swallowed ice water. It was a selfie. Ethan grinning at the camera, giving a thumbs up. But behind him, barely visible in the camera's flash, stood a figure in white. A woman. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a flowing dress or gown. Her face was turned toward Ethan, but the flash had overexposed the image, washing out her features into a bright white blur. Only her eyes were visible, 2 dark holes in the white expanse of her face. My hands started shaking so violently, I nearly dropped the camera. Bile rose in my throat, tasting like copper and fear. This was impossible. Digital manipulation. Photoshop. Some kind of elaborate hoax. But I knew Ethan's timeline. 3 minutes between this photo and Sarah's call. No time to fake anything. I scrolled to the next image. Same pose, same grin. But the woman in white was closer now, standing just behind Ethan's left shoulder. Her dress was clearly visible, a long flowing white gown that seemed to flutter despite the still air. Dark stains spread across the fabric like spilled wine. Next photo. The woman's hand rested on Ethan's shoulder. Her fingers were impossibly long, more like talons than human digits. Ethan was still smiling, apparently unaware of her presence. Next photo. The woman in white was facing the camera now. Her face was visible, and I had to grip a tree trunk to keep from falling. She was beautiful in the way that corpses are beautiful, perfect features drained of warmth and life. Her skin was bone white, her lips blue-black. But her eyes, Christ. Her eyes were the worst part. Empty sockets that seemed to go on forever, like looking into deep wells. Next photo. Ethan's expression had changed. The smile was gone, replaced by a look of dawning horror. His eyes were wide, staring at something beyond the camera frame. Behind him, the woman in white was gone. Last photo. Just fog. Thick white fog filling the entire frame. But if you looked closely, and God help me, I looked very closely, you could see shapes moving in that fog. Human shapes. And in the very center, almost invisible, a figure in white reaching toward the camera. I turned off the camera with shaking fingers and immediately called for backup on my radio. Dispatch, this is Ranger Hayes. I need immediate SAR assistance at Cherokee Orchard Road. I have a missing person case that's... I paused, not sure how to explain what I'd found. That's beyond normal protocols. Copy that, Ranger Hayes. What's the nature of the situation? I stared into the fog, which seemed to be getting thicker. I'm not sure. Just send everyone you can. But even as I said it, I knew no amount of backup was going to help with what I was dealing with. For the first time in my 12-year career, I was facing something that couldn't be explained by logic, training, or common sense. The woman in white was real, and she had Ethan. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Connor's situation? Comment below. I decided to follow Cherokee Orchard Road deeper into the mountains, using my GPS to mark my position every 100 yards. The fog continued to thicken until my flashlight beam only penetrated about 10 feet. Every step felt like walking through cotton, and the silence was so complete it made my eardrums ache. At 1:17 a.m. I found the first piece of Ethan's clothing. His gray North Face jacket hung from a tree branch 8 feet off the ground, sleeves spread wide like someone had been crucified. The fabric was torn along the shoulders as if something with claws had grabbed him from behind. Dark stains that looked like blood covered the back panel, and the jacket was still warm to the touch. My breathing became rapid and shallow as I examined the tears in the fabric. The pattern was wrong for any animal I knew. Too precise, too intentional. Like someone had used surgical instruments to flay the jacket off Ethan's body. I bagged the jacket as evidence and continued up the road. My radio crackled with static, and through the white noise I swore I heard a woman's voice singing a lullaby. Every time I stopped to listen more carefully, the singing stopped. The next piece of evidence was worse. Ethan's jeans lay crumpled in the middle of the road, turned inside out as if they'd been peeled off his body. The denim was shredded, soaked with something dark and viscous that wasn't quite blood. It had a metallic smell that made my mouth water with nausea. But it was what I found in the back pocket that made my knees buckle. A photograph. Old, faded, creased like it had been carried for years. It showed a young woman in a white wedding dress, holding a small child. The woman was beautiful, with dark eyes and long black hair. The child, a little girl maybe 3 years old, wore a pink frilly dress and clutched a stuffed rabbit. I turned the photo over, written in faded ink. Maria and Emma Santos, 1987. My vision narrowed to a tunnel as the implications hit me. This wasn't just some random paranormal encounter. Ethan hadn't just been investigating the woman in white. He'd been carrying her photograph. Her real photograph. Which meant he knew something about Maria Santos that went beyond local folklore. The fog suddenly swirled around me like it was alive, forming shapes and faces that dissolved the moment I tried to focus on them. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath, and ice crystals began forming on my jacket. My radio burst into static so loud it made me jump, and underneath the noise I definitely heard that woman's voice again. Emma. Where's my Emma? Have you seen my little girl? I keyed my radio with numb fingers. Dispatch, this is Ranger Hayes. I need you to run a background check on Maria Santos, died 1987, Cherokee Orchard Road area, and Emma Santos, same time frame. Ranger Hayes, your transmission is breaking up. Can you repeat? I tried again, but my radio just produced more static. The fog pressed closer, and I realized I could no longer see the road behind me. I was surrounded by white nothingness, with only my flashlight beam to guide me forward. That's when I heard Ethan screaming. The sound came from ahead up the mountain, raw and desperate and inhuman. Not the scream of someone in pain, the scream of someone having their sanity torn apart piece by piece. It echoed off the mountain walls, seeming to come from all directions at once. Ethan! I shouted, running toward the sound. My boots slipped on wet leaves and loose rocks, but I pushed forward, following his voice like a beacon. Ethan, where are you? His screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by something worse. Sobbing. Deep, broken sobs that sounded like a grown man having his heart ripped out. I found him at 1:43 a.m., in a clearing I'd never seen before despite 12 years of hiking these mountains. He was sitting on the ground, back against a massive oak tree, completely naked. His skin was chalk white in my flashlight beam, covered in thin red lines like someone had been drawing on him with a razor blade. But he was alive, conscious, looking right at me with eyes that held far too much terror for any human mind to contain. Connor? His voice was a broken whisper. Oh God, Connor, you can't be here. She's coming back. She's bringing Emma. I rushed to his side, pulling off my jacket to cover him. His skin was ice cold, and the cuts across his chest and arms were still bleeding. They formed a pattern I couldn't make sense of. Symbols or letters in some language I didn't recognize. Ethan, what happened? Who did this to you? He grabbed my wrist with fingers that felt like frozen iron. She thought I was him. She thought I was Emma's father, the one who killed them. Tears streamed down his face, and his whole body shook with hypothermic tremors. She showed me how they died, Connor. She made me feel it. The car spinning out of control, the tree, Emma crying in the back seat. Easy, easy. Let's get you warmed up and out of here. I activated the emergency heat pack from my SAR kit and started pressing it against his core. We can talk about this later. No. He gripped my wrist tighter. You don't understand. She's not done. She's never done. Maria doesn't just kill people. She makes them experience her death over and over until they go insane. And then she takes them to Emma. The fog around us began to swirl faster, and I heard something moving in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. Connor, she knows you're here now. Ethan's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. She can smell the uniform, the badge. She thinks all Rangers are the same one. Officer Martinez. He was first on scene the night she died. She's been looking for him for 31 years. The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard a new sound, a child crying. Soft, heartbroken sobbing that seemed to come from the ground itself. "Mama, Mama, I'm scared. Mama, where are you?" Ethan's face went dead white. "Emma's calling." When Emma calls, Maria comes. That's when I saw her. She emerged from the fog like a photograph developing in reverse. First just a white outline, then details filling in until she stood 20 feet away, solid as stone and twice as cold. Maria Santos wore a white funeral dress that moved in a non-existent breeze, the fabric pristine except for dark stains across the chest and stomach. Her long black hair framed a face that was beautiful and terrible, with skin like porcelain and eyes that held 31 years of grief and rage. But it was her wounds that made my rational mind finally snap. Her skull was caved in on the left side where it had struck the steering wheel. Bone fragments jutted through her hair like broken glass. Her neck was twisted at an impossible angle, and when she moved her head, I could hear vertebrae grinding against each other. One arm hung limp at her side, clearly shattered in multiple places. She opened her mouth to speak and black blood poured out. "Have you seen my Emma?" Her voice was the sound of wind through broken windows, beautiful and horrible at the same time. "My little girl is lost. She's been lost for so long." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but Ethan couldn't move and I wouldn't leave him. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I stood up and faced her. "Maria, my name is Connor Hayes. I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." She tilted her broken head, studying me with eyes that leaked tears of blood. "You wear the uniform. You have the badge. You're him. You're the one who let my baby die alone in that hospital." "No, Maria. Officer Martinez retired 15 years ago. I never met Emma. I'm sorry for what happened to you both, but I'm not the person you're looking for." Her face twisted with rage and the temperature plummeted another 20 degrees. Ice formed on the trees around us and my flashlight beam began to flicker. "Liar," she shrieked, and the sound shattered the ice on the branches above us. Frozen shards rained down like glass daggers. "You're all the same. You all just watched while my baby suffered." She began moving toward us, and with each step the ground cracked and withered. Plants died instantly where her feet touched, leaving a trail of blackened earth. That's when I remembered something from my training. Crisis negotiation. De-escalation. Sometimes the most dangerous situations required not force, but understanding. "Tell me about Emma," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Tell me about your daughter." Maria stopped. For a moment, her face softened, and I could see the woman she'd been before the accident. Young, loving, devoted to her child. She was 3 years old, 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Her voice became gentle, almost musical. She loved her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppers. She carried him everywhere. She was going to start preschool in the fall. "She sounds wonderful. She was perfect." Maria's smile was heartbreaking. "We were going to visit her grandmother. I bought her a new dress, pink with little flowers. She was so excited." The smile faded, replaced by anguish so profound it made the air itself seem to weep. The rain started so suddenly. The roads were slick. I lost control coming around Devil's Curve. The last thing I remember was Emma screaming for me from the back seat. "It wasn't your fault," I said quietly. "Accidents happen. You couldn't have known. But I should have protected her." Maria's voice rose to a wail that echoed off the mountains. I was her mother, and when she was dying in that hospital, where was I? Dead in some morgue while my baby cried for me. She raised her arms, and I saw the full extent of her injuries. Both forearms were snapped in half, jagged bones protruding through the skin. But it was her wedding ring that caught my attention. A simple gold band that somehow remained perfect, despite everything else being broken. "You loved her very much," I said. "More than life itself. More than anything in this world or the next." And that's when I understood. The pattern of disappearances, the 31 years of haunting, the victims she'd chosen. Maria wasn't just a vengeful spirit. She was a mother, searching for her lost child. "Maria, what if I told you I could help you find Emma?" Her eyes blazed with sudden hope. "You know where she is?" "I have an idea, but you have to let Ethan go first. He's not the man who hurt you. He's just a kid who is trying to understand your story." She looked at Ethan, who was barely conscious from hypothermia and blood loss. For a moment, her maternal instincts seemed to override her rage. "He's someone's child too," she whispered. "Yes, and his mother is worried sick about him just like you worried about Emma." Maria closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, some of the fury had faded. "If I let him go, you'll help me find my Emma?" "I promise." The cold began to lift, and Ethan's shivering gradually subsided. Color returned to his lips, and the cuts on his body stopped bleeding. "Thank you," I said. Maria nodded, then looked at me with an expression that was almost shy. She would be 34 now if things had been different. My heart clenched. "Maria, I need to tell you something. About Emma." Her face went very still. "What about my Emma?" This was the hardest part. The part that would either save us all or get us both killed. "Emma isn't lost, Maria. She's been waiting for you." "Waiting? Where?" I took a deep breath. "She died 3 days after the accident, at Children's Hospital in Knoxville. But she wasn't alone." Maria's eyes widened. "She wasn't?" "The nurses stayed with her. They held her hand and sang to her. And when she passed, she was surrounded by people who cared about her. She wasn't afraid." Tears of blood streamed down Maria's face. "My baby, my poor baby." "She's been waiting for you to come home, Maria. For 31 years, she's been waiting for her mama to stop searching and come be with her." The fog around us began to thin, and in the distance I heard something beautiful. A child's laughter. Happy, carefree, full of joy. "Mama." The voice was clear as crystal, coming from somewhere beyond the veil between worlds. "Mama, I'm here. I'm right here." Maria's face transformed with wonder and desperate love. "Emma? Emma, baby, is that you? I've been waiting, Mama. Mr. Hoppers and I have been waiting for you to come home." The laughter came closer, and with it a warmth that drove away the supernatural cold. Maria turned toward the sound, and for the first time since her death, she looked at peace. "I'm coming, sweetheart. Mama's coming." She began to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. But before she disappeared completely, she turned back to me. "Thank you," she said, "for helping me remember what matters most." And then she was gone, walking into a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The fog lifted completely, revealing a normal October night in the Smoky Mountains. The oppressive supernatural presence vanished, leaving only the clean smell of pine and the normal sounds of nocturnal wildlife. Ethan stirred in my arms. "Connor? What happened? Where is she?" "She went home," I said quietly. She finally went home. The rest of the night was a blur of EMTs, incident reports, and very carefully worded explanations. Ethan was treated for hypothermia and multiple lacerations, but he made a full recovery. The official report listed it as an animal attack, though no one could identify what kind of animal makes cuts in symbolic patterns. Ethan never talked publicly about what happened that night. He deleted his paranormal investigation YouTube channel and went back to school to become a counselor. But sometimes he calls me, usually around the anniversary, just to talk. "Do you think she found her?" he asked me last October. "Yeah," I said, watching the sunset over the mountains. "I think she did." The Cherokee Orchard Road is quiet now. No more disappearances, no more sightings of a woman in white. The locals say the road feels different, lighter somehow, like a weight has been lifted. But I still patrol that area regularly, not because I'm worried about Maria Santos. She's exactly where she needs to be. I patrol because I learned something that night that changed everything about how I see my job. Sometimes the missing aren't lost. Sometimes they're just looking for the way home. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to help them find it. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Ethan in those missing hours. I read every single one. My name is Jake Morrison, and when 3 people swore they saw Chloe Anderson in different locations at the same hour, I knew we were facing something beyond comprehension. The call came in at 14:47 on October 13th, 2018. I'd been a ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for exactly 2 months and 3 days. Still new enough that my uniform creases were sharp and my gear tags weren't yet faded from mountain weather. Still new enough to think I understood what missing person meant in these ancient hills. Unit 23, what's your 20? Dispatch crackled through my Motorola radio, the static sharp in the afternoon silence. Cataract Falls Trail, mile marker 3.2, I responded, checking my Garmin GPS. The coordinates read 35.6532 out again, 83 und 5070 degree W. Copy dispatch. Jake, we've got multiple reports on that missing hiker. Chloe Anderson, 23, brown hair, blue day pack. Thing is, dispatch paused and I heard papers shuffling. We've got 3 witnesses who spotted her at 14 hours. Problem is, they're claiming different locations, simultaneously. My breathing became more deliberate as I processed this. The October air suddenly felt thinner at 4,200 feet elevation. Copy that, can you give me specifics? Witness 1 saw her on Alum Cave Trail, 2.1 miles up. Witness 2 spotted her at Chimney Tops Trailhead. Witness 3 swears she was at Cataract Falls Overlook, all 3 times logged at exactly 2 p.m. I stopped walking. The leather of my hiking boots creaked as I shifted weight. These locations were minimum 45 minutes apart by foot, even for an experienced hiker. The skin on my forearms prickled despite my long-sleeve regulation shirt. That's not possible, I said into the radio. That's what we thought. But all 3 witnesses are credible. Park volunteer, experienced hiker, and a local photographer. None of them know each other. My mouth went dry. I'd transferred here from Glacier National Park in Montana, where missing persons meant bears, hypothermia, or falls. Clean explanations, logical dangers. But something in the Tennessee mountain air felt different, heavier, like the trees themselves were holding secrets. What was Anderson doing up here? I asked, pulling out my field notebook. The paper felt damp from mountain humidity. According to her roommate, she was researching local folklore for some college project. Apparently, she'd been asking questions about old legends around Gatlinburg, real interested in Native American stories about the mountains. A cold drop of sweat traced down my spine despite the moderate temperature. I hadn't grown up with these mountains legends like the local rangers. To me, they were just topographical features on maps, elevation changes to calculate, drainage patterns to memorize. But the way dispatch's voice carried a subtle tension suggested I was missing something crucial. I'm heading to interview the witnesses, I said, starting with the closest location. Copy that. And Jake? Mrs. Anderson called again. 4th time today. She's desperate. Flew down from Ohio this morning. Says Chloe promised to call every night, and she missed last night's check-in. The radio went quiet except for static. I pictured a mother somewhere staring at her phone, willing it to ring. My own mom used to wait for my calls when I was Chloe's age. The weight of someone else's family fear settled in my chest like a stone. I hiked to Chimney Tops Trailhead first, boots finding purchase on the well-worn trail. The parking area held maybe 15 cars, typical for a Tuesday afternoon. Found my witness sitting on a picnic table, camera gear spread around him like he was conducting an inventory. You the ranger looking for the girl? He asked before I even introduced myself. Mid-50s, weathered hands, expensive Canon DSLR hanging from his neck. Local accent thick as tree sap. Jake Morrison. You're the photographer who spotted Chloe Anderson? Spotted her, hell. Had a full conversation with her. He pointed toward the trail entrance. Right there, 2 p.m. sharp. I remember because I was checking my camera's timestamp for the lighting shots. My notepad felt slippery in my suddenly damp palms. What kind of conversation? She asked about the old stories, specifically about things that ain't supposed to be in these mountains anymore. His eyes narrowed. Said she'd heard tell of something that could make folks see things that weren't exactly real. The muscles in my neck tightened like someone was adjusting guitar strings. What kind of things? Look, Ranger, I've been photographing these mountains for 30 years. There's places up here. Places the Cherokee used to warn people about. Most of us locals, we just know to avoid certain areas when the conditions ain't right. What conditions? He gestured at the sky. Thick cloud cover was rolling in from the west, the kind that made afternoon feel like dusk. When the mist comes down heavy like this, when visibility drops and sounds carry funny, that's when people start seeing things that shouldn't be there. I wrote everything down, but my handwriting looked shaky. Professional instinct told me to ask logical questions about timing, clothing descriptions, direction of travel. But something deeper, some instinct I'd never needed in Montana, was whispering that logic might not apply here. Where exactly did you see her go? Up the trail about 50 yards, then she just wasn't there anymore. Figured she'd stepped behind trees or something, but when I walked up to check, couldn't find any sign of her. No footprints off the main trail. No disturbed vegetation, like she'd just vanished. My shirt felt damp under my arms. I thanked him and drove to Alum Cave Trail, radio chattering with normal park business that suddenly sounded surreal. Bears and garbage, vehicle breakdown at Cades Cove. Routine stuff that belonged in a world where missing persons stayed missing in one location at a time. The second witness was a park volunteer, a retired teacher who'd been leading a nature walk. Found her with a group of elementary kids pointing out different tree species with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she genuinely loved her job. "Kids, this is Ranger Morrison," she announced when I approached. 20-something 6-year-olds stared at me with the uncomfortable intensity children reserve for uniformed adults. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm here about Chloe Anderson." Her smile faded. "Children, let's practice identifying those hickory leaves we discussed." She walked me a few steps away from the group. "That poor girl. I've been thinking about her since I called it in." "Tell me exactly what happened." She was asking the same questions she'd apparently been asking all over the park, about local legends, specifically about... Mrs. Patterson glanced at the children, then lowered her voice. "About things that could make people lose their way. Things that could make reality seem... flexible." My stomach muscles contracted involuntarily. She used that word? Flexible? Her exact word. Said she'd found references in old Cherokee stories about something that lived in these mountains long before European settlement. Something that could make people see what it wanted them to see. The afternoon light was fading faster than it should have. The cloud cover was thickening, and visibility was dropping like someone was slowly dimming a theater's lights. Around us, the forest was becoming a collection of shapes rather than distinct trees. "Where did you last see her?" "Walking up the trail toward Arch Rock. But here's what troubles me, Ranger. I've been leading walks on this trail for 8 years. Know every rock, every route, every turn. When I looked for her 5 minutes later, there were no footprints past the point where I'd seen her walking. A chill that had nothing to do with altitude ran through my arms. The trail was muddy enough to show prints. Muddy enough that your boots would leave clear impressions, but past the spot where she'd been walking, the trail looked like nobody had been on it all day. I thanked Mrs. Patterson and radioed dispatch for the third witness location. My hands were steady on the radio, but I noticed I was gripping it tighter than necessary. "Unit 23, your third witness is at Cataract Falls Overlook. Local hiker named Tom Bradley. Says he's willing to wait for you there. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Jake Morrison's situation? Comment below." The drive to Cataract Falls took 25 minutes through increasingly dense fog. My headlights carved weak tunnels through air thick enough to feel solid. The mountains around me disappeared into gray nothingness, leaving just the yellow line of the road and the rhythmic thump of my windshield wipers. Tom Bradley was exactly where he'd promised to be, sitting on the stone wall that bordered the overlook. 50s, beard gone gray, the kind of lean build that suggested he spent more time on trails than in offices. "You Morrison?" he called as I parked. "That's right. You saw Chloe Anderson here at 2 p.m.? Saw her, talked to her, watched her do something that still doesn't make sense to me." He stood up, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "You mind if we walk while we talk? Being stationary up here in this fog, it makes me nervous." We started walking the short loop trail around the falls area. The sound of water cascading over rocks provided a steady background rhythm, but somehow it seemed muffled, like we were hearing it through thick glass. "She was standing right at the overlook rail," Bradley said, looking down into the gorge like she was searching for something specific. When I asked if she was okay, she turned around and I swear to God, Ranger, her eyes looked different. My breath came out in a small, visible puff despite the relatively warm temperature. Different how? Like she was seeing something that wasn't there. Or maybe like she wasn't entirely there herself. Her pupils were dilated huge, even though we were in bright daylight. And when she spoke, her voice had this weird echo to it. What did she say? Asked me if I'd ever seen the old one. The one that moves between spaces. Said she'd been following signs all day, and they were leading her deeper into the mountains. My footsteps faltered. The phrase "moves between spaces" hit me like cold water. Signs. That's when she pointed down into the gorge. Said she could see lights moving down there, arranged in patterns that meant something. But Ranger, I looked where she was pointing, and there was nothing there. Just rocks and water and fog. We'd completed half the loop when Bradley stopped walking abruptly. "This is where it gets weird," he said. "Weirder than what you've already told me?" She asked me to look at something, turned to point deeper into the trees. When I looked back, she was gone. But here's the thing that's been eating at me all afternoon. I could still hear her voice. The skin on my scalp tightened. Hear her saying what? Calling out coordinates. GPS coordinates. Over and over, like she was reciting them for someone to write down. But the voice was coming from deeper in the forest, moving away from the trail. Do you remember any of the coordinates? Some of them, I wrote down what I could catch. He pulled out a small notebook, pages damp from the humidity. 356891 north, 83.4987 west. She repeated those numbers maybe 6 times. I checked my own GPS unit. Those coordinates would put someone approximately 2 miles southeast of our current location, in some of the densest, least accessible forest in the park. Terrain where even experienced hikers could disappear without a trace under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. "Mr. Bradley, are you familiar with local legends about these mountains?" His expression shifted. "Which ones specifically?" "Anything about something that could make people see things. Something that could appear in multiple places at once." He was quiet for a long moment, fog swirling around us like we were standing inside a cloud. "You've been talking to other witnesses. 3 different people saw Chloe Anderson at 2 p.m. today. 3 different locations, 45 minutes apart minimum." Jesus. He sat down heavily on a fallen log. "Ranger, my family's been in these mountains for 4 generations. Some stories get passed down because they're entertaining. Others get passed down because they're warnings. Tell me." Cherokee called it the one who walks between. Said it was old when their people first came to these mountains. Described it as something that could appear human but wasn't entirely. Something that could make people see what it wanted them to see. Be where it needed to be. My throat felt dry. Why would it want Chloe? According to the stories, it feeds on people who are searching for it. People who dig too deep into the old legends. Who ask too many questions about things that should stay buried. It uses their own curiosity against them. Bradley looked directly at me and I could see genuine fear in his eyes. The stories say it shows itself to people in pieces. Makes them think they're tracking it, following its trail. But really, it's tracking them, learning them. And when it knows enough... He didn't finish the sentence. When it knows enough... What? It takes them between. Not dead, not alive. Just between, I radioed dispatch for Chloe's last known GPS location and any additional information about her research. The static seemed heavier than usual, filled with interference that sounded almost like whispers. Unit 23, we've got an update on Anderson's research. According to her laptop search history, she'd been specifically looking for information about shape-shifting entities in Cherokee folklore. A lot of searches for terms like serpent people and the ones who change skins. My blood felt like it was cooling degree by degree. Serpent people. Apparently, she'd found some old stories about entities that could appear partially human, but maintained reptilian characteristics. Stories about something that could hypnotize people, make them see multiple versions of the same event. The coordinates Bradley had heard started making sense in a way that made my chest tight. If something was deliberately leading Chloe deeper into the mountains, if it could make multiple people see her in different locations to confuse any search efforts. Dispatch, I'm going to need backup and emergency equipment. Grid coordinates 35.6891 north, 83.4987 west. Copy that. But Jake, you've got maybe 2 hours of daylight left and fog's getting thicker. Might be better to wait for morning. I looked around at the gray world closing in around us. Every instinct told me waiting was exactly what the entity wanted. Time to complete whatever process it had started. Negative. If Chloe Anderson is still alive, tonight might be the last chance to find her. Bradley was standing behind me when I finished the radio call. You're going after her. It's my job. Your job doesn't include dealing with things that ain't entirely in this world, Ranger. The stories about the one who walks between, they don't have happy endings. Then maybe it's time for a new story. I gathered my gear, headlamp, GPS unit, emergency radio, first aid kit, rope, emergency shelter. Everything felt heavier than usual, like the mountain air was thick enough to add weight to physical objects. The hike to the coordinates took me through terrain that wasn't on any official trail map. Old-growth forest where trees were thick enough that 3 people holding hands couldn't circle them. Places where the canopy was so dense that even in daylight, I needed my headlamp to see clearly. The fog made everything worse. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet in any direction. The beam of my headlamp created a small bubble of yellowish light in an ocean of gray, and beyond that bubble, anything could be waiting. After an hour of hiking, I started hearing things. Footsteps that matched my pace exactly, but came from slightly behind and to the left. When I stopped, they stopped. When I started walking, they resumed. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there except trees and fog. Then came the voices. Chloe's voice calling my name from different directions. Sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, sometimes from the sides. Always just at the edge of my hearing range. Always too indistinct to make out words clearly. My shoulders pulled up toward my ears involuntarily. The muscles in my jaw clenched so tight I could hear my teeth grinding. Sweat formed at my hairline despite the cool mountain air. "Chloe," I called out. "Chloe Anderson." The voices stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own breathing, rapid and shallow, like I'd been running instead of hiking. My hands were damp inside my work gloves. Then I heard something that made every muscle in my body go rigid. Laughter. Not human laughter. Something that started low and hissing, like air escaping from a punctured tire, then rose to a sound that was almost musical but wrong in every way that mattered. The laughter was coming from directly ahead of me. I forced myself to keep walking toward it. The GPS coordinates Bradley had overheard led to a natural clearing where the tree canopy opened up enough to let in the gray afternoon light. In the center of the clearing was something that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. Chloe Anderson was there. All of her. 3 versions of Chloe Anderson, standing in a triangle formation about 20 feet apart. Each one wearing the same blue daypack, same hiking boots, same brown hair pulled back in the same ponytail. Each one staring at something in the center of their triangle. And in the center, coiled and waiting, was something that made my vision blur at the edges. It was humanoid in the loosest sense of the word. Tall, maybe 7 feet, with proportions that suggested it had started with a human template and then been stretched and modified by something that didn't quite understand how human anatomy worked. Its skin had a gray-green tint that seemed to shift and move even when the creature was still. But it was the eyes that made my breathing stop entirely. Snake eyes, vertical pupils and yellow irises, but huge, the size of dinner plates. And when those eyes fixed on me, I felt something grab hold of my thoughts and start pulling. The world began to ripple. Suddenly, there were multiple versions of the clearing, multiple versions of myself standing at the tree line, multiple versions of the creature, some more human-looking, some more serpentine, all of them existing simultaneously, overlapping like double-exposed photographs. I understood in a moment of horrible clarity how Chloe had been seen in 3 places at once. The creature didn't just change shape, it changed reality around itself, creating multiple versions of events, multiple possible outcomes, multiple truths existing side by side. One of the Chloe versions turned toward me. Her face was slack, eyes unfocused, like she was seeing something infinitely far away. "He came," she said, her voice carrying that same strange echo Bradley had described. "Just like you said he would." The creature's massive head turned toward me. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once, reverberating through the ground, the trees, the air itself. "The new one walks in our ancient places," it said. "The new one asks questions about things he does not understand." My legs felt disconnected from my body. The rational part of my mind was screaming at me to run, to get back to the radio, to call for backup that couldn't possibly handle what I was seeing. But something else, some deeper instinct, told me that running would trigger something worse. "Let her go," I managed to say. My voice sounded small and human in a place where those qualities suddenly seemed like critical weaknesses. "She came seeking truth about the old stories," the creature said. "We have shown her truth. She has seen how reality bends when will is stronger than what your kind calls possible." The 3 Chloe versions began walking in slow circles around the creature, never breaking their triangular formation. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, like they were all controlled by the same source. "She wanted to understand how we move between spaces," the creature continued. "We have brought her between. Now she exists in multiple possibilities simultaneously. Soon she will choose which possibility to make permanent." "What kind of choice?" "To remain between, serving as our guide for others who seek forbidden knowledge, or to return to your linear existence but carry our mark forever." One of the Chloe versions looked directly at me. For just a moment her eyes seemed to clear, seemed to hold the desperation of someone trapped in a nightmare. "Don't let it," she whispered. Then her expression went slack again. My hands trembled as I reached for my radio. The creature's laugh filled the clearing. "Your devices will not function here," it said. "We exist between frequencies, between possibilities. Your world's rules become suggestions in our presence." I tried the radio anyway. Static. Then worse than static. Voices speaking in languages that hurt to hear. Words that seemed to crawl into my ears and nest there. "What do you want?" I asked. "We want nothing. We simply are. But you have entered our domain seeking what was taken. We offer exchange." "What kind of exchange?" "You wish to return her to your linear existence. We will consider this, but first, you must understand what she has learned." The creature's eyes fixed on mine again, and the world exploded into chaos. I was suddenly experiencing every possible version of this moment simultaneously. In one version, I was running back through the forest, calling for backup that would never find this place. In another, I was shooting the creature with a sidearm I didn't carry, bullets passing harmlessly through something that wasn't entirely physical. In a third, I was joining the Chloe versions in their endless circling, my own will subsumed into the creature's collective consciousness. But in one version, just one, I was standing my ground and refusing to accept any of the impossible things I was seeing. In that version, I was remembering something Mrs. Patterson had said about Cherokee stories. Something about how certain entities fed on belief, on the acceptance of their reality. In that version, I was choosing to believe in the most boring, mundane truth. That Chloe Anderson was a college student who had gotten lost in the mountains, and I was a park ranger whose job was to find her. I focused on that version with everything I had. The multiple realities collapsed back into one. I was standing in a clearing in Great Smoky Mountains National Park at approximately 17:30 hours on October 13th, 2018. There was one Chloe Anderson, sitting on the ground near a fallen log, looking disoriented but very much alive. There was no creature. There was just a man. Mid-40s, gaunt, wearing old camping gear that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. He was crouched behind a tree about 30 feet away, watching us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When he realized I could see him, he smiled. His teeth were filed to points. "Interesting," he said, standing up slowly. "Most people accept the first story we show them." I kept my voice steady. "Chloe, can you hear me?" She turned toward me, blinking like someone waking up from a deep sleep. How long have I been here?" "Since yesterday night. There are people looking for you." The man stepped into the clearing. Up close, I could see that his camping gear was decorated with symbols that looked like they'd been carved rather than sewn. His fingernails were longer than they should be, and when he moved, he did it with a fluid grace that seemed just slightly off for human anatomy. "She was learning about us," he said, "about the old ways. We thought she might be ready to join our community." "What community?" "People who have chosen to live between the official world and the real world. People who understand that reality is more flexible than park rangers believe." I helped Chloe to her feet. She seemed physically unharmed but confused, like someone recovering from a concussion. "The stories," she mumbled. "The Cherokee stories were real, some of them." "Stories are just stories," I said firmly, more for my own benefit than hers. "Let's get you back to people who are worried about you." The man watched us prepare to leave with an expression that might have been amusement. "You know what you saw," he said to me. "You experienced the between. That knowledge doesn't just disappear because you choose not to believe it." I didn't answer, but as we walked back through the forest, I found myself looking over my shoulder every few minutes. And sometimes in my peripheral vision, I thought I saw multiple versions of myself walking slightly different paths through the trees. The hike back took 2 hours. Chloe was weak but able to walk with assistance. She didn't remember much about the past day and night, just fragments about following lights through the forest and meeting people who showed her how things really worked. When we reached the trailhead, an ambulance was waiting. Chloe's mother was there too, having driven up from Gatlinburg when she heard her daughter had been found. "Thank you," Mrs. Anderson said to me as paramedics checked Chloe's vital signs. The other rangers said it was probably too late, that she'd been missing too long in this weather. "Just doing my job," I said. But that wasn't entirely true. As I filed my incident report later that evening, I left out significant details. Officially, Chloe Anderson had gotten disoriented during a solo hike and spent one night in the forest before being located by standard search procedures. I didn't mention the multiple witness sightings. I didn't mention the man with filed teeth. I didn't mention the moment when reality had seemed to split into multiple versions of itself. Some stories, I decided, were better left as stories. But 3 weeks later, I got a call from Chloe Anderson. "Ranger Morrison? This is going to sound crazy, but I keep having these dreams. Dreams about that day in the forest. And in the dreams, I remember things that I don't think happened." "What kind of things?" "I remember talking to something that wasn't entirely human. I remember being in multiple places at the same time. I remember you fighting some kind of battle that wasn't exactly physical." I was quiet for a long moment. "Dreams can be strange after traumatic experiences," I finally said. "Maybe. But Ranger? In the dreams, I remember you saving my life by choosing not to believe something that was trying to convince you it was real." After she hung up, I sat in my ranger station office looking at topographical maps of the Great Smoky Mountains. Thousands of square miles of wilderness, hundreds of places where reality might be more flexible than Park Service regulations account for. I've been a ranger here for 6 months now. I've handled dozens of missing person cases since Chloe Anderson. Most of them have conventional explanations, most of them. But sometimes when the fog rolls in heavy and the witnesses start describing impossible things, I remember what I learned in that clearing, that some stories survive because they're warnings, and some warnings survive because they're true. And sometimes when I'm walking alone on the trails, I catch myself looking for multiple versions of my own footprints in the mud. Because once you've seen how thin the line is between what's real and what's possible, you never stop wondering which side of that line you're standing on. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Chloe Anderson. I read every single one. My name is Connor Hayes, and the last message from Mike Davis still echoes in my radio. Connor, something's wrong here. This man, he's not static. Please help me. They're not human. Inhuman sounds. The transmission cut to static at 3:47 p.m. on October 28, 2018, and I haven't slept properly since. I was finishing my afternoon patrol route through Sector 7 of the Great Smoky Mountains when my radio crackled to life with Mike's panicked voice. The interference was unlike anything I'd heard in my 12 years as a ranger. Not just static, but something that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. Mike Davis, 34, experienced backpacker from Nashville, had checked in at the Cataract Falls trailhead that morning with plans for a 3-day solo hike to Thunderhead Mountain. My hands trembled as I tried to raise Mike again. Unit 23 to Mike Davis, please respond. What's your exact location? Static filled the channel, but underneath it I could swear I heard something breathing. The sound made my throat constrict like invisible fingers were pressing against my windpipe. Sarah's text message from this morning was still glowing on my phone screen. Emma lost another tooth. She wants to show Daddy when you get home. Grace is making you a welcome home card. Love you. Be safe. The twins' gap-toothed smiles seemed to watch me from my phone's wallpaper as I grabbed my emergency pack and headed toward Mike's last known coordinates. The GPS showed Mike's location as 35.6892 Degan, 83.53 Tudig W, near the old Elkmont settlement ruins, a place that always made veteran rangers uncomfortable. Local Cherokee legend spoke of a hungry place where the boundary between worlds grew thin, but I'd never put much stock in folklore. My scientific mind, honed by years of search and rescue training, focused on facts. Missing hiker, emergency situation, family depending on my return. But as I hiked deeper into the forest, the familiar sounds of autumn wildlife fell silent. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. My breathing became shallow and rapid, like my lungs couldn't remember how to process the suddenly thick air. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in the past hour, despite the weather service predicting a warm October afternoon. Mike Davis, this is Ranger Hayes responding to your distress call. Can you hear me? I transmitted every few minutes as I followed the narrow deer path toward his coordinates. Each time the static grew more aggressive, almost angry. My radio's display flickered with symbols that weren't part of any standard interface. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The trail markers seemed wrong. I'd hiked this route hundreds of times, but the familiar blazes were in positions that defied my memory. A white diamond that should have been on an oak tree now marked a pine. A yellow arrow pointed toward terrain that couldn't exist according to the topographical maps I'd memorized. My internal compass, usually reliable as a GPS, spun uselessly in my head. I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual this deep in the mountains. But the clock showed 4:23 p.m., which was impossible. I'd been hiking for less than 30 minutes, but my watch insisted nearly an hour had passed. The disconnect between time and reality made my stomach churn with nausea that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The forest grew darker despite the early afternoon hour. Not the natural dimming of thick canopy, but an aggressive shadow that seemed to swallow light. My high-powered LED flashlight, fresh batteries installed that morning, barely penetrated 3 feet ahead. The beam flickered erratically, creating dancing shadows that moved independently of their sources. Hello? Is someone there? The voice came from ahead, weak and desperate, male matching Mike's vocal pattern from his radio call. My ranger training kicked in. Approach cautiously, assess the situation, maintain radio contact with base. But when I tried to radio my location, the handset produced only the sound of wet breathing. Through the unnatural darkness, I saw a figure huddled against a massive hemlock tree. Dirty clothes, unkempt hair, the unmistakable silhouette of someone who'd been living rough. My heart rate spiked as I recognized the classic signs of a homeless individual in distress. Every instinct screamed to help, the same paternal drive that made me check on Emma and Grace 3 times each night. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm Ranger Hayes with the National Park Service." I kept my distance but projected calm authority. The figure looked up, and my blood temperature plummeted like I'd been dunked in ice water. The face was human, but the eyes reflected light like an animal's. Flat, predatory, ancient. "Please, help me," the voice pleaded. But the words didn't match the mouth movements, like watching a badly dubbed foreign film, except the synchronization was off by entire seconds. My vision narrowed to a tunnel as every primitive alarm in my brain began screaming simultaneously. "I'm looking for Mike Davis. Young man, backpacker, about 6 feet tall. Have you seen him?" My voice came out steadier than I felt, though my hands had gone numb with cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The homeless man smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too sharp, arranged in patterns that violated human dental anatomy. "Mike, yes. He's with us now." The thing wearing human form gestured toward the deeper woods. "He's waiting, in the place where the old agreements were made." As it moved, I caught a whiff of something that made my throat close up. Not just unwashed human, but decay laced with sulfur and something metallic that reminded me of old pennies. If this story's giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Connor Hayes' situation? Comment below. My radio suddenly burst to life with Mike's voice. "Connor, don't trust. Not human." The ritual worked. They're wearing. Screaming. The transmission cut to static filled with what sounded like multiple voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization. Each syllable made my vision pulse red at the edges. The homeless man's head tilted at an impossible angle, 90 degrees like an owl, but with the wet sound of vertebrae popping. "Your friend discovered our little secret. The failed ritual in 1987. It didn't fail at all. It just took 31 years to find the right vessel." Its voice had changed, becoming layered with harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. My mind reeled as fragments of ranger station folklore suddenly clicked into place. Old Jim Matheson, retired ranger who'd worked these mountains for 40 years, had always warned about the Elkmont ruins. He'd mentioned missing hikers in the late 80s, a case that was quietly closed without explanation. Federal agents in black SUVs. Sealed records. In 1987, a group of college students thought they could bind a minor demon. They were partially correct. It was minor, by the standards of the things that dwell between the stars. The creature's form began to blur at the edges like heat distortion, but in reverse. Reality seemed to bend around it, creating optical illusions that made my eyes water and my balance falter. I thought of Sarah tucking the twins into bed, probably wondering why Daddy was late for dinner. Emma's loose tooth, Grace's crayon drawing, the normal human warmth of family love that suddenly seemed fragile as spun glass against the cosmic indifference radiating from this thing. The students failed to contain it properly. It needed time to mature, to understand your species well enough to wear your forms convincingly. The homeless man's skin began to ripple like water, revealing glimpses of something underneath that my brain refused to process. Mathematical impossibilities of flesh and angles that existed in too many dimensions. My legs trembled as I backed away, but the forest had changed around us. Trees that had been 20 feet apart were now close enough to touch. The trail behind me had vanished, replaced by dense undergrowth that looked decades old. Space itself was malleable here, subject to rules that predated human understanding of physics. Mike learned the truth, that this entity was never truly bound, just sleeping, growing, learning how to perfectly mimic human compassion so it could feed on the kindness of people like you. The thing's voice was becoming multiple voices, some speaking backwards, others in frequencies that vibrated through my bones rather than my ears. I tried to run, but my legs moved through air thick as molasses. Each step took enormous effort, like running underwater while wearing lead boots. Behind me, I could hear the creature's laughter, not one voice, but a chorus of every person who'd ever shown kindness to the homeless man it wore like a costume. Your family loves you very much, Connor Hayes. Sarah, Emma, Grace, such beautiful names, such warm, beating hearts. The knowledge that this thing knew my family's names hit me like a physical blow. My vision fragmented into kaleidoscope patterns as panic overrode rational thought. The truth crystallized with cosmic horror that dwarfed every human concern I'd ever held. This wasn't just a monster or even a demon in any traditional sense. It was something from the spaces between reality, where the laws of physics were suggestions and human concepts like love and kindness were exotic energies to be harvested and consumed. The original binding required 13 souls freely given through acts of compassion. 12 hikers over 31 years have fed themselves to me through their own kindness. Mike Davis was number 12. The creature's form was dissolving entirely now, becoming a writhing mass of geometries that hurt to perceive directly. I understood with sanity-shattering clarity that my ranger training, my physical fitness, my love for my family, none of it mattered. I was facing something that existed on scales of time and space that made human civilization a fleeting spark. The entity had been patient for 3 decades, carefully selecting victims whose compassionate nature would override their survival instincts. You will be number 13, Connor Hayes, and then I will be free to spread beyond these mountains, to visit your home, to meet your lovely family. The thing's words bypassed my ears entirely, resonating directly in my skull like the voice of a malevolent god. But as cosmic terror threatened to shatter my sanity completely, something unexpected happened. The photo of Emma and Grace on my phone screen pulsed with warm light that seemed to push back the unnatural darkness. Not supernatural power, just pure human love. The one force in the universe that even cosmic entities couldn't fully comprehend or replicate. No, I whispered. Then louder, no. My voice grew stronger as I focused on Sarah's morning kiss, Emma's giggle when she lost her tooth, Grace's determined concentration as she colored my welcome home card. Love wasn't just emotion, it was defiance against a universe that wanted to reduce humanity to insignificance. The creature recoiled slightly, its impossible form flickering. Impossible. The binding requires willing sacrifice through compassion. You must choose to help the vessel. I choose my family. I pulled out my emergency flare, not as a weapon but as a beacon. The bright red light cut through the dimensional distortion like a blade, creating a pocket of normal space-time around me. I choose to go home to people who love me instead of feeding myself to something that can only imitate love. For the first time in eons, the cosmic entity experienced something like uncertainty. Its feeding strategy depended on exploiting the very best of human nature: kindness, compassion, the instinct to help those in need. But love for family, protective rather than charitable, was something outside its calculations. I ran toward what I hoped was the real trail, clutching my flare like a talisman. Behind me, the creature's roars shook reality itself, causing trees to phase in and out of existence. But I held on to the memory of normal human love. Breakfast table conversations, bedtime stories, the weight of small arms around my neck and welcome home hugs. The forest gradually returned to normal as I put distance between myself and the entity. Real birdsong resumed. My GPS started working again. The temperature rose to seasonal norms, but I knew the thing was still out there, still waiting for hiker number 13. I never found Mike Davis's body. The official report listed him as a missing person, lost to the wilderness. But sometimes late at night when I'm tucking Emma and Grace into bed, I hear his voice on my radio. Don't trust the homeless man. The ritual worked. They're still waiting. I requested a transfer to a different park. Some cosmic horrors are too patient, too vast. too alien for any human to face twice and retain their sanity. But I go home every night to family love that burns brighter than stars. The one thing in the universe that even creatures from between dimensions can't truly understand or defeat. The homeless man is still out there in Elkmont, wearing his mask of human need, waiting for the 13th kind soul to complete a binding that will unleash something ancient and hungry on an unsuspecting world. And sometimes in my worst nightmares I see Sarah or one of the twins hiking alone through those woods, their compassionate hearts leading them straight into cosmic horror beyond human comprehension. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Mike Davis. I read every single one.